The impossible riddle. The Galactic Academy of Logic stood as a testament to intellectual achievement across the cosmos. Its silver spires reached toward the three suns of the Marilon system, a physical manifestation of the heights of knowledge attained within its walls. For 12,000 years, the Academy had gathered the brightest minds from across 17 galactic sectors, producing thinkers who shaped the foundations of interstellar civilization. Professor Zixvalter glided into the amphitheater on his gravity cushion, his 6 upper appendages holding various data crystals, while his lower tentacles manipulated the environmental controls. The Tolvanks were known throughout the galaxy for their multiprocessing capabilities. Their 12-lobed brains could simultaneously track multiple complex problems, making them natural polymath savants. Attention, class. Professor Zixvaltar's voice resonated through the neural amplifiers. Today marks the 322nd cycle of advanced problematic logic. I trust you have all completed the preliminary equations I assigned. The amphitheater held 37 students from 23 species, each a prodigy selected through rigorous trials. Near the back, partially hidden by the hulking carapace of a Duverian thinker, sat Mira Chen, the first and only human admitted to the Academy in its long history. At 26 Earth years old, Mira had been granted admission after proving that human mathematics could solve the Kryllian constant paradox, a feat no other species had accomplished. Still, among beings who had evolved for logical processing, whose neural pathways were constructed specifically for abstract reasoning, she remained an anomaly. A curiosity, a primitive species representative granted access through what many considered a statistical fluke. This cycle, Professor Zixvalter continued, his voice carrying a rare note of excitement. We will attempt something unprecedented. The Council of Logic has approved my request to present to you the Kryllian Conundrum. A ripple of neural responses surged through the room, visible in the fluctuating auras of several psychoreactive species. Even Mira, despite her limited human senses, could feel the sudden tension. For those unfamiliar, the professor continued, the Kryllian Conundrum is considered the most perfect logical puzzle ever devised. Created by the now extinct Kryllian species 3 millennia ago, it has remained unsolved despite attempts by the greatest minds of 26 civilizations. The professor's primary eyes swiveled toward Mira briefly. It is said that the solution requires a perspective no evolved mind can achieve, a cognitive impossibility, yet mathematically provable to have an answer. Mira shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The exoskeletal student beside her, Rax of the Kryllian hive, emitted a faint clicking sound that her translator rendered as amusement. The human will certainly be lost now, Rax whispered, mandibles barely moving. Your species still uses binary computing models. This puzzle requires at minimum septenary logic gates. Mira smiled politely but said nothing. She had grown accustomed to the dismissive attitudes. Humans were newcomers to galactic society, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 73 years ago. In cosmic terms, they were infants stumbling onto a stage where other players had been performing for millennia. Professor Zixvaltar activated the central projector, and a complex series of symbols floated in the air. To most observers, it appeared to be an incomprehensible array of geometric shapes, mathematical notations, and conceptual frameworks that seemed to fold in on themselves in impossible ways. The Kryllian Conundrum presents a system in which all variables are simultaneously fixed and in flux, the professor explained. It requires the solver to hold 7 contradictory states in their mind, while identifying the singular path through which all states can exist without paradox. Mira stared at the projection, her brow furrowed. Unlike her classmates, whose specialized neural architectures allowed them to process vast amounts of conflicting information, she had only her human brain, evolved for hunting, gathering, and social cooperation on a single planet. You have until the end of this academic cycle to submit your attempts, continued Professor Zixvaltar. I do not expect solutions, merely approaches. The conundrum has never been. It's a perspective shift. Mira's voice cut through the amphitheater, clear and confident. The silence that followed was absolute. Professor Zixvaltar's appendages froze mid-gesture, all four of his eyes focusing on the human. "Excuse me, Student Chen." The professor's voice had dropped an octave, a sign of either great interest or grave offense in Tolvank's communication. Ilara hesitated, suddenly aware that every consciousness in the room was focused on her. But she had seen it, a pattern within the chaos, a structure that reminded her of something so fundamentally human that she couldn't unsee it once recognized. "The puzzle," she said, standing up. "It's not about finding a path where all 7 states can coexist. It's about recognizing that the observer creates the paradox." She walked down to the central floor, approaching the hovering projection. The other students shifted, some leaning forward with interest, others radiating skepticism through their bioluminescent appendages. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the control panel. Professor Zixvaltar hesitated, then extended one appendage in permission. "Proceed, though I must caution that greater minds have." Ilara accessed the controls and manipulated the display. The complex shapes shifted, rotated, and reconfigured as her fingers danced across the interface. The Kalindri were unique among ancient species, she explained as she worked. According to Earth's xenoarchaeological records, they were the only known civilization to develop art before mathematics. Their earliest artifacts show they conceptualized space through emotional response rather than measurement. The projection suddenly snapped into a new configuration, still complex, but with a strangely harmonious quality that hadn't been apparent before. "This isn't a logical problem seeking a logical solution," Ilara continued. "It's a logical representation of an illogical process. The answer isn't found through computation, but through recognition." She made one final adjustment, and the projection transformed. What had been an incomprehensible collection of contradictory states now formed a cohesive, flowing pattern that seemed to breathe with its own rhythm. The Kalindri weren't asking how to make 7 paradoxical states coexist, Ilara said softly. They were showing that paradox only exists when you try to separate the states in the first place. It's not about finding the path. It's about seeing that there was never a division to begin with. Professor Zixvaltar floated closer, his tentacles trembling slightly as he examined the reconfigured puzzle. "This is impossible," he whispered. "You've altered the fundamental components of the conundrum." "No," Ilara shook her head. "I just looked at it the way a human would. We evolved to see patterns as both parts and wholes simultaneously. Our brains developed to track prey through forests, to read emotional cues for survival, to tell stories that could hold contradictory truths." The professor extended a sensory appendage into the projection, interacting with the flowing pattern. His neural amplifier emitted a series of tones that signaled profound surprise. "The solution verifies," he announced, his voice resonating with disbelief. "Student Chen has solved the Kalindri Conundrum." A Merxian student with crystalline thought structures visible beneath translucent skin raised an appendage. "This cannot be correct. The human lacks the neural architecture to process septenary logic." "That's just it," Ilara replied. "This puzzle doesn't require processing 7 states simultaneously. It requires seeing that the 7 states are actually a single state viewed from different angles." Another student, a gaseous intelligence contained within a pressurized suit, emitted a series of mathematical objections. The computational power needed to reach this conclusion would exceed even a Tolvank's integrated cortex. Professor Zixvaltar had been silent, his appendages working furiously across multiple interfaces as he verified Ilara's solution against ancient Kalindri records. "The objection is noted, Student Vaporus," the professor finally said, but it seems Student Chen's approach bypassed the need for such computation entirely. She recognized a pattern that our logical frameworks prevented us from seeing. He turned all 4 eyes toward Ilara. "In 3,000 years, no intelligence in the galaxy has approached the conundrum this way. We have been attempting to solve a problem that couldn't be solved because we misunderstood the nature of the question." The amphitheater erupted in a cacophony of reactions, some students emanating waves of disbelief, others producing rapid calculations to verify the solution, a few sitting in stunned silence. Rax, the Kriveri who had dismissed Ilara earlier, approached her with clicking mandibles. "How did you see it?" The insectoid asked, all pretense of superiority gone. "What did you perceive that we could not?" Ilara looked around at her alien classmates, suddenly aware of the profound difference in how their minds worked. For them, logic was a linear path, each step building upon the last in perfect order. For humans, thought was a chaotic, intuitive process. Jumping connections, emotional reasoning, pattern recognition shaped by millions of years, evolving on a dangerous planet where survival often depended on illogical leaps. "I think," she said carefully, "it's because humans aren't purely logical beings. We're storytellers. We see meaning in chaos, patterns in randomness. Where you see 7 contradictory states, we see 7 chapters of a single story." Professor Zixvalter had finished his verification. The entire amphitheater fell silent as he approached Ilara. "Student Chen," he said, his voice now carrying harmonics of respect that her translator struggled to fully capture, "you have accomplished what no being has done since the Kalendri themselves. The Academy will need to reassess many of its fundamental assumptions about cognitive processing." He extended a formal greeting appendage toward her, an honor rarely bestowed upon students. "It seems that humanity brings something unexpected to our galactic community, something we perhaps did not know we needed." As Ilara accepted the gesture, she felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about solving an ancient puzzle. It was about demonstrating that humanity's perceived weaknesses, their emotional thinking, their intuitive leaps, their irrational creativity, might actually be their greatest contribution to a universe that had mastered logic but forgotten how to see beyond it. The first human at the Galactic Academy of Logic had just proven that being human was anything but a disadvantage. And as the news spread from the amphitheater through neural networks and quantum communications, species across 17 sectors would soon be reconsidering everything they thought they knew about the primitive, emotional, illogical beings from Earth. The human perspective. News of Mira Chen's solution to the Kryllian Conundrum spread through the Galactic Academy of Logic with unprecedented speed. By the time the 3 sons of Merilon had completed their dance across the sky, every academic institution in the 17 sectors had received word. The impossible had been accomplished, by a human, no less. The following days brought chaos to Ilara's normally structured routine. Species that had previously ignored her now sought her out, some with genuine curiosity, others with barely concealed suspicion. Security drones hovered near her quarters, ostensibly for her protection, though Ilara wondered if they were actually monitoring her for some undisclosed purpose. 7 days after her breakthrough, she received a formal summons to Professor Zixvaltar's private research chamber, an honor typically reserved for doctoral candidates or visiting dignitaries. The professor's chamber was a marvel of Zen architecture, with walls that shifted between solid and transparent states depending on the occupant's site requirements. Currently, they displayed the swirling nebula that surrounded the Merilon system, casting the room in gentle blues and purples. "Student Chen." Professor Zixvalter greeted her, his gravity cushion lowering to meet her eye level, a gesture of equality rare among the hierarchical Tolvanks. "I appreciate your promptness." "Thank you for inviting me, Professor," Ilara replied, taking the offered seat that adjusted its molecular structure to accommodate human physiology. "I have been conducting extensive research since your demonstration," the professor said, activating a holographic display between them. "The Council of Logic has granted me unprecedented access to the Kalendri archives, including materials previously deemed too fragmented for study." The display showed fragments of ancient artifacts, symbols similar to those in the conundrum but arranged in different patterns. The Kalendri civilization collapsed approximately 3,028 standard years ago, he continued. Their final communications indicated they had reached what they called the ultimate understanding, a concept that has baffled scholars ever since, Many theorized it was merely poetic language for their scientific achievements. Ilara studied the fragments with interest. But you think it was something else. Indeed, the professor's appendages manipulated the display, bringing forward a particular fragment. This partial text, when re-examined using the pattern recognition principles demonstrated in your solution, reveals something quite remarkable. The symbols rearranged themselves, forming a coherent message that the translator rendered into Federation standard. When logic divides, insight unites. The final truth lies not in separation of thought from emotion, but in their dance together. Ilara felt a chill of recognition. That's basically how humans think all the time. We never fully separated logic from emotion in our development. Precisely, Professor Xeno-Scientists said, all four eyes focused intently on her. And that is what I find so fascinating. The most advanced civilization known to galactic history appears to have evolved toward a cognitive approach that humans possess naturally. He dismissed the hologram with a gesture. Student Chen, I must ask, when you looked at the conundrum, what exactly did you see that enabled your solution? Ilara considered the question carefully. How could she explain something so intrinsically human to a being whose entire evolutionary path had prioritized logical processing over emotional response? I saw a story, she finally said. Not with words, but with patterns. The 7 contradictory states reminded me of something from human literature. The concept of paradoxical characters who embody opposing traits simultaneously. She leaned forward. In human stories, we accept that a character can be both brave and fearful, selfish and selfless, wise and foolish, all depending on context. When I looked at the conundrum, I didn't try to solve it mathematically. I asked what story it was trying to tell. The professor's tentacles rippled, a sign of deep contemplation. Fascinating. The calendry artifacts have always suggested they incorporated narrative structures into their mathematics, but we dismissed this as primitive methodology. Perhaps their extinction was not due to technological failure, but to achieving a state of understanding that their physical forms could no longer sustain. Or perhaps, Ilara suggested, they evolved beyond the need for physical form at all. The chamber fell silent as both human and alien contemplated this possibility. There is another matter, Professor Xeno-Scientists said eventually, his tone shifting. Your solution has caused considerable political disruption. The Rewritten Consortium has expressed concern about human cognitive capabilities being unpredictable. Ilara had expected this. The consortium, comprising the oldest spacefaring species, had initially opposed humanity's admission to the Academy. They fear what they don't understand, she said simply. With reason, the professor countered. Your species achieved faster than light travel barely 7 decades ago. Yet already you have solved what our greatest minds could not in 3 millennia. It raises questions about human potential that some find unsettling. We've had this conversation before in human history, Ilara said, a sad smile crossing her face. When different human cultures met, there was often fear before understanding. But we learned, eventually, that diversity of thought creates stronger societies than uniformity ever could. Before the professor could respond, his communication interface chimed urgently. One appendage activated it, projecting the stern visage of Chancellor Vorthax, the Academy's highest authority. Professor, the Chancellor said without preamble, the consortium has called an emergency session. Their representatives are demanding a full cognitive assessment of all human students and faculty. There is only one human student, Chancellor, Professor Xeno-Scientists replied calmly, and no human faculty as yet. Nevertheless, they insist. The Duvarian ambassador specifically cited security concerns following the Calendry incident. Ilara felt a flare of indignation. Incident. I solved a puzzle. I didn't threaten anyone. The Chancellor's compound eyes shifted to regard her directly. From the consortium's perspective, Student Chen, you demonstrated cognitive capabilities that cannot be predicted or modeled, capabilities that could potentially be weaponized. That's absurd, Ilara protested. By that logic, Any form of intelligence could be considered a weapon. Indeed, the Chancellor agreed, surprising her, which is precisely why the Academy has always carefully monitored intellectual advancement across all species. But humans appear to make cognitive leaps without traceable logical steps. This presents a unique challenge to our security protocols. Professor Zixvalter intervened. Chancellor, I believe there is an opportunity here rather than a threat. I propose a joint research initiative, using the principles student Chen demonstrated to explore new approaches to previously unsolvable problems. The Chancellor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. The consortium will demand restrictions. Then let them witness the benefits firsthand, the professor countered. I have already identified 3 grand problems that might yield to this human perspective. After a tense moment, the Chancellor nodded. Very well. Prepare your proposal for the emergency session. Student Chen will accompany you to address questions directly. The projection vanished, leaving Ilara and the professor in silence. 3 grand problems, Ilara finally asked. Professor Zixvaltar's mouthparts formed what she had learned to recognize as a Tulvank smile. I may have slightly exaggerated for political expediency. I have identified 17 problems that would benefit from your human perspective. He gestured toward a previously invisible door that materialized in the chamber wall. If you are willing, I would like to show you something few non-Tulvanks have ever seen. The door led to a smaller chamber filled with swirling patterns of light, a Tulvank's memory repository. At its center floated a crystalline structure unlike anything Ilara had seen before. This, Professor Zixvalter said reverently, is a fragment of the last Kalindri communication device ever recovered. For centuries, we believed it contained their final message, perhaps an explanation of their disappearance, but we could never access its contents. Ilara approached cautiously. And you think I can? I think, the professor said, that sometimes we need a storyteller, not a mathematician, to understand a message. Ilara studied the crystal, noting how light bent through it in patterns reminiscent of the conundrum. Acting on instinct, she reached out and touched its surface. The crystal immediately pulsed with light, and the room filled with a projection far more complex than the conundrum had been. It showed what appeared to be a map of consciousness itself, pathways of thought, emotion, and perception interwoven in a tapestry of incredible complexity. It's beautiful, Ilara whispered. It appears to be responding to your neural patterns, Professor Zixvalter observed, his scientific detachment temporarily overwhelmed by wonder. This is unprecedented. As Ilara continued to interact with the crystal, patterns began to emerge, not solutions exactly, but frameworks for understanding. She saw concepts that defied translation, ways of perceiving reality that transcended traditional sensory input, methods of communication that required no medium, forms of consciousness that existed in multiple states simultaneously. I think, she said slowly, this isn't a message. It's an invitation. An invitation to what? The professor asked. To evolve, not technologically, but cognitively. Ilara felt certainty growing within her. The Kalindri weren't trying to solve problems. They were trying to transcend the limitations of problem-solving itself. The crystal's projection shifted, forming what appeared to be a bridge between different states of existence. Professor, Ilara said, her voice filled with excitement, I think I understand what happened to the Kalindri. They didn't go extinct. They transformed. They found a way to exist as pure consciousness, beyond physical form. Professor Zixvaltar's appendages trembled with excitement. This would explain why no Kalindri remains were ever found despite extensive archaeological expeditions, and why they left the conundrum behind. Ilara added, it wasn't a test of intelligence, it was a signpost, a way to identify species capable of following their path. The implications settled over them like a physical weight. If Ilara was right, the Kalindri had achieved what countless philosophies had only theorized, transcendence beyond physical existence. The consortium's emergency session is in 6 hours, Professor Zixvalter said finally. I believe our proposal has just become considerably more significant. When they entered the great chamber of the consortium later that day, Ilara felt the weight of thousands of alien gazes upon her. Representatives from every major spacefaring species had gathered, their neural networks and communication fields creating a tapestry of thought that hummed with tension. Chancellor Vorthax called the session to order. We are gathered to address concerns regarding the unexpected cognitive capabilities demonstrated by human student Mira Chen in solving the Kryllian Conundrum. The Duvarian ambassador rose immediately. The consortium demands a full assessment of human cognitive potential and appropriate restrictions until such assessment is complete. Unpredictable intelligence presents an unacceptable security risk. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Professor Zixvalter floated forward. Esteemed representatives, I believe we are approaching this situation from a fundamentally flawed perspective. Student Chen has not demonstrated a threat. She has revealed a gift. He activated a projection of the crystal's output. What you see before you is the first successful interaction with Kryllian technology in 3 millennia. Through Student Chen's assistance, we have discovered that the Kryllian achieved cognitive transcendence, an evolution beyond physical form. The chamber erupted in chaos as translation systems struggled to convey the concept across dozens of languages and thought patterns. When order was finally restored, the professor continued. The human cognitive approach, what they call intuition or lateral thinking, appears to be not a primitive trait but an advanced one that the Kryllian themselves evolved toward before their transformation. Ilara stepped forward. Representatives of the consortium, I understand your concerns. Humans are new to your galactic community, and our thought processes may seem chaotic or unpredictable to species that evolved along different paths. She gestured to the projection. But what if that very unpredictability is actually our greatest gift to the galaxy? What if the perspective we bring isn't a threat to order, but a key to understanding deeper truths that pure logic cannot access? The Meridian elder, oldest among the assembled representatives, leaned forward. And what would you propose, Human Chen? A collaborative initiative, she replied, not to assess and restrict human cognition, but to combine it with the logical brilliance of other species. Together, we might address problems that have remained unsolved for millennia, and perhaps, eventually, follow the path the Kryllian discovered. She looked around the chamber, meeting the compound eyes, sensory stalks, and perception fields of countless alien species. Humanity doesn't want to disrupt your order. We want to be part of it, to contribute our unique perspective to a greater whole. The chamber fell silent as the representatives communicated through neural networks and pheromone exchanges, debating her proposal without spoken words. Finally, the Chancellor spoke. The consortium acknowledges the potential benefits of this human perspective. We approve Professor Zixvaltar's research initiative with appropriate oversight. A wave of tentative relief washed over Ilara, but the Chancellor wasn't finished. However, he continued, we also recognize that humanity's rapid advancement and unique cognitive approach require special consideration. A liaison committee will be formed to facilitate understanding between human intuitive processes and traditional logical methodologies. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. As the session concluded, Professor Zixvalter approached Ilara. You have opened a door that has been closed for millennia, he said quietly. What lies beyond it may transform our understanding of consciousness itself. Ilara nodded, looking out at the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds who were now regarding humans not as primitive newcomers, but as unexpected bearers of a new kind of wisdom. That's what humans have always done best, she replied with a smile. We don't just solve puzzles, we reimagine them. And in doing so, we discover paths that no one knew existed. As she left the chamber, Ilara felt the weight of humanity's new role in the galaxy. They had arrived as students, eager to learn from ancient civilizations. Now, unexpectedly, they had become teachers as well, bringing a perspective that the logical universe had forgotten it needed. The impossible riddle had been answered, But the greater question remained: what other impossibilities might fall before the unique power of the human mind?